Hello and welcome to today's module, Developing Talent. It's our job as a coach to help our athletes reach their optimal performance. Source of the information in today's module comes out of our Gilbert textbook, Coaching Better Every Season. The learning objectives for this module are that we'll be able to explain how free play and sports sampling help develop talent. We'll be able to identify the phases of differing athlete development models. Additionally, we'll be able to compare and contrast the long-term athlete development model as well as the American development model, and we'll discuss evidence-based strategies for developing talent. Let's begin by recognizing that developing talent is complex, and it's much easier said than done. However, there are some sport psych talent development constructs that we can look at and learn, and these will help us develop guidelines for developing talent in our athletes. The first sports psych construct we will look at is the development model of sport participation. The two unique features of this model, for coaching in particular, is that there's unstructured play and that it really relates to sport diversification, also known as free play and sampling. So what is free play? Well, it's what we did as kids and what kids do today. It's all designed around having fun, and it's unstructured, led by the participants and organized by them, and this involves all sorts of games. There's no rules, there's no coaches out there, there's nothing going on that would impede the creative nature of games like this. And what they've found is that, incorporating free play as we develop as athletes is as critical as it was when we were younger. And it's necessary that we involve as coaches, that we include free play in our practice structures, because it does. It nurtures that creativity and enhances that problem solving that is often necessary, especially as we become more and more skilled at the sport that we are playing. A couple keys to free play, or key benefits of free play, is that it really does maximize the enjoyment and intrinsic motivation. It's very autonomous. Since there is no coaching and no structure, everybody gets to choose kind of how they do it and how they want to play with one another. And that also within free play, especially as we incorporate it down the line, it helps us reduce the risk of emotional and physical burnout as well as overuse injuries. Now, sports sampling, well, what is that? Well, it's what you probably did as a young kid, and it's the opposite of sports specialization. So if you played many sports growing up, you sampled a lot of different sports. And what that really led to is that you became better at many different skills, speed drills or speed skills, agility, balance, some of the basics. And you also learned about strategies from different sports that you can incorporate into different, all the different sports that you're playing. And this is what is known as multilateral development. And multilateral development really is that ability to develop a strong foundation of general athletic skills by engaging in many different sports. And similar to free play, a key benefit to sports sampling is that you reduce those risks of burnout and overuse injuries because you get to develop the musculature in many different ways as opposed to using the same movements over and over again, such as in sports specialization, which is why it's critical that we don't specialize in a sport too early. Now, some of you have heard that it takes 10,000 hours of deliberate practice to develop talent. Now, is that a truth or is that a myth? Well, in the original research done 30 plus years ago, it was discovered that, it took approximately 10 years or 10,000 hours of deliberate practice to become an expert. But more recent research indicates that that actually varies among athletes, and that it can take anywhere between 4,000 hours to 10,000 hours to actually develop the skills required for the level that you're playing. So what was once thought of as truth has been dispelled as a myth. But whether it takes you 4,000 hours or 10,000 hours, again, varied on each athlete, it really does require deliberate practice as opposed to just practicing. So when we're looking at talent development and we're going to look at practice design, it's important that we have intentions in our practice design and that we set up goals, because that'll help drive deliberate practice. Now, when designing your practices and deliberate practice in particular, It's important that the type and quality of practice matter more than the actual volume. So sometimes people think, well, if I just go and do a little bit more, keep going, push through, you know, if it's not deliberate and or if you are overdoing it, you might actually see decrements in performance as opposed to performance enhancement. And so deliberate practice requires a couple things. And the reason why volume has to be reduced in deliberate practice is because it's a super intense mental concentration type of practice. There's high physical effort. Now, it's really important that coaches understand the age and stage of development that they have or that their athletes have. And then it's also important in deliberate practice to focus on long-term development. So don't think that you have to, develop these skills within the next 2 months, 3 months, 5 months, whatever that may be, especially if you're going to have an opportunity to coach these kids for a period of a year or longer. And that you would have to think about it as, well, when I am done after a year, how much better, what kind of talent do I need to develop in this athlete to then let them move on to the next phase with the next coach? So don't think that we have to accomplish everything within some specified amount of time. It's really athlete dependent in what we want to do. But again, make sure that we use deliberate practice as opposed to just practicing. Now, because deliberate practice is really an intense effort, both mentally and physically, it's important that we balance that with free play. As mentioned earlier in this module, free play is a key element to helping reduce that emotional and physical burnout as well as overuse injuries. So, it's one of those things that within your practice design, you may start the practice with a free play game or end the practice with a free play type activity, just to help those athletes, do something that they're autonomous with and build that excitement through practice. And during this time, especially when the athlete gets to choose what they want to do, they may choose to work on a skill that will actually, improve their performance, or they may choose an activity that just relaxes them and makes them have fun. And that's really, at the end of the day, if we can continue to make training fun, athletes will be more willing to put in the effort when it's required. Now let's take a look at our second sports psych construct that can help us understand athlete development. It's known as the Long-Term Athlete Development Model, or LTAD. Now, understanding this model will help us align our coaching strategies with the age and stage of our athlete's development. Now, there are 3 phases in this model. The first phase is known as physical literacy. The second phase is excellence to high performance. And the last phase is active for life. Now, the primary goal of this model is to be able to motivate all participants to be active for life, no matter if they achieve high performance or not. Because as physical educators and coaches and those involved in sports and exercise science, really the primary goal is to help us all understand the health benefits, both mental and physical health benefits of being active for life. So again, this model is really developed to just help us guide our coaching and training practices with our athletes. Now, it's important to keep in mind, though, that when we talk about age and stage, we're not necessarily talking about biological age. A lot of times, we need to make sure we evaluate our athletes on not just their biological age and their physical development, but also on their maturation and their ability to listen and follow instructions and their coping mechanisms. So, beyond just taking it at face value of age and stage, make sure that you do an evaluation of your athletes to understand not just their biological age, but also their maturation age in terms of mental capacities. Within phase 1, the physical literacy phase, there are actually 3 stages. During the first stage of the active start, this is really where we're just developing gross motor skills. This is from birth until, early on, probably 3 or 4, maybe just before 5, where you're developing how to move, right? From being able to roll over as a baby, to crawl, to walk, to balance. So that's what's happening in the first stage of this phase. And the second stage is the fundamentals. Now, this is when you're going to develop more fine motor skills to improve coordination, agility, and balance. And then the last stage in this phase is that you learn to train. Now, this is where you're going to introduce basic training techniques and organized sports are also introduced at this stage. Now, the primary goal during this phase is to teach basic movement skills, again, such as coordination, agility, and balance, while making it fun, so that way they want to come back and they want to return the following season. Now, make sure that you take note that this phase of physical literacy is really designed, or really happens before the age of 12. And notice that there's no sports specialization indicated during this developmental phase. And that's critical because all too often parents and or coaches get caught up in the desire to try and push kids through this phase and into phase 2 prior to their mental and physical maturation, which could oftentimes lead to burnout and or emotional and physical distress. Now, phase 2 of the long-term athlete development model is known as the excellence to high performance phase, and this occurs between the ages of 12 to 18 years, and there are 3 stages within this phase. By the time an athlete reaches this phase, they will have already had some exposure probably to organized sports and coaching. And now, although coaches should teach and reinforce fundamental movements across all phases, the coach's primary role during this second phase should actually shift more to teaching sport-specific skills and tactics. So let's identify each stage. Stage 4 is when we train to train. This is when we need to develop a baseline of conditioning for the body. In stage 5, we train to compete. We actually utilize strength and conditioning principles and programming in order to optimize our athletes' physical and mental abilities. And in stage 6, we actually train to win, which requires a coach to have in-depth knowledge of their sport and know how to prepare their athletes for high-performance competitive situations. Now, it's important to note that some athletes may actually never reach this phase, but others, depending on the sport and their level of physical and emotional preparedness, may enter this phase quite readily or earlier than anticipated. Also, keep in mind that this phase really has no upper age limit. Some professional and Olympic athletes compete in their 40s and 50s, and masters athletes compete well beyond that age. And so you can see that this is leading into that desired goal and the outcome of the long-term athlete development plan of being active for life, which leads us into phase 3 and the 7th stage, which is being active for life. So regardless of the phase at which an athlete leaves organized sports, the ultimate goal of the long-term athlete development model is to increase the likelihood that all sports participants will reach this phase. Now, most that reach this phase do so without any coaching, and oftentimes it takes the form of getting involved in the city leagues of softball or basketball or any sport that they offer. And oftentimes during this phase of an athlete's development, they realize and decide that they want to become a mentor or a coach. Oftentimes they've had such a great experience that they want to share that experience with others and help other athletes develop that love for being active for life. Let's take a moment and simplify our understanding of these first 2 constructs by combining the models and how we can look at the progression of development. So the development model of sport participation really does complement the long-term athlete development model. And some of the key things that we can take away from that is that we want to incorporate that free play and sports sampling early on in athlete development. This is a key to multilateral development, so we can translate sports skills from one sport to another. And that will allow us to progress into more specialized training and even sports specialization and taking up only maybe 1 or 2 sports to allow us then to focus our time, energy, and effort to train specifically to compete and then to win and then be able to have our peak performance when it's necessary. So by combining these 2 models, it gives coaches a comprehensive and well-rounded understanding of athlete development. Now let's take a look at our 3rd and final construct of athlete development for this module. The American Development Model, also known as ADM, was developed by the United States Olympic Committee in 2014. As you review this model, you'll notice some similarities to the long-term athlete development model, but there are a couple key differences. This model was designed to help coaches understand and give guidelines to help them provide a healthy sporting experience that would be based on the physical, mental, and emotional level and potential for growth of each athlete. Stage 1 of the athlete development model is referred to as the discover, learn, and play phase, and this happens for kids and participants under the age of 12. It's important that coaches focus on creating safe and fun sporting experience that will motivate young athletes to return to sport and participation year after year. Stage 2 is known as the development and challenge stage, and this typically occurs between the ages of 10 and 16. By this time, athletes are typically more ready to handle greater emphasis on sport-specific skill development as well as more intense training, and that would include individual and group tactics. It's important to note that coaches during this stage should really encourage multi-sport participation, again, going back to sports sampling and reaping the benefits of multilateral development of those foundational skills such as agility, coordination, strength, and balance, while reducing the risk of burnout and overuse injury due to sport specialization. Stage 3 of the American development model is known as the train and compete stage. And this stage covers the ages of between 13 and 19 years old. Now you'll notice that this actually overlaps stage 2, and that is due to the idea that you have to make sure that you understand the age and stage that an athlete is at, so making sure that you understand their physical and mental development. So for those that are looking to begin to specialize in a sport, that usually occurs during this stage for those that are physically and mentally ready. Most high school coaches will be working with athletes in this stage. And it's during this stage that competitive athletes will have to limit their sport involvement to one or maybe two sports so that they can focus more on their specialization and having even more intense training than that of stage 2. In addition to training, they also have to balance their competition schedules. So during this stage, it's important that coaches are really beginning to implement psychological skills training and coping mechanisms, because the pressure and stress of this stage, especially for the younger athletes, can oftentimes be pretty heavy. And there's a need that we have as coaches and a responsibility we have as coaches to make sure that not only are our athletes physically prepared, but they're also mentally prepared when we have them get into this train and compete stage. Stage 4 of the American development model is actually a fork in the road for many young athletes. And as you can see here, it's for athletes that are about 15 years or older. Now, this fork in the road is where athletes who are participating now will decide, are they going to continue to carry on and compete at a much higher level? So about the sophomore year, maybe junior year of high school, athletes really then kind of decide, are they going to continue on and play sports competitively, or are they just going to kind of back out and turn into more of a recreational sport athlete? But regardless of which pathway a participant goes, it's important that we should help all athletes find opportunities and continue reaping the many benefits of both social and health benefits of participating in activity and sport. And this goes into encouraging these athletes to be active for life, which is the 5th and final stage for the athlete development model. This stage is actually labeled Thrive and Mentor, and it emphasizes the ultimate goal of an athlete development model, which is being active for life. Now, at this phase, there are unlimited opportunities. Again, similar to the long-term athlete development model, there are many athletes that enter this who were never competitive in high school or beyond, but yet love to compete in sport or even take a recreational view of sport and love to just be involved. So this is where the individual focus on what is fun and what they want to develop skills in is important. And again, this whole development model is all about providing a healthy experience in sports that will allow participants to be motivated to continually improve their health and fitness throughout their life. So let's take a moment just to compare and contrast the long-term athlete development model and the American development model. Take a minute and take some notes and notice the differences and similarities. Write down what you observe. Some things to take note. How many stages are in each? Do any stages correspond to another stage? In one model, it accounts for the divergence of pathways athletes might take. Think about the age and stage for each model. Do they line up? How so, and how do they differ? And lastly, what are their ultimate goals? Are those same or different? So lastly, I just want to discuss a few broad guidelines for developing talent. We've reviewed 3 constructs that have really kind of boiled down to a few things. One is that free play in early development and throughout developmental stages is important to incorporate during practice. It is evident that sports sampling during adolescence is key to multilateral development, which then benefits the athlete when they begin to specialize in sport. Training level should match physical and mental maturation of the athlete, and that we shouldn't just take the biological age and assume that the athlete should be in one phase or stage as their same aged participants in the sport. At some point, there does need to be a shift to sport specialization, but not until after physical, mental, and athletic skill development has been reached. And most of these models would indicate that that's around approximately 16 years old. So prior to 16 years old, it's not advised to really specialize in any one sport. However, depending on the individual athlete and their mental and physical development, it's likely that some may enter sport specialization earlier. Lastly, it's really important that we take a long-term view of athlete development and focus on the enjoyment and the love of the game. And it's that love of physical activity and participation in physical activity that is the ultimate goal of all of these models, because it's really all about reaping the benefits mentally, physically, emotionally, and socially that come with a lifelong participation in sport.